The prairie wind carried dust across the flats like ash from some ancient fire. Out on the edge of Texas, where the land broke open into endless sky, a cabin leaned against the horizon. Its wood was gray and dry as bone, the roof patched with tin that rattled whenever the night wind found a crack. Inside, a man sat before the fire, a bottle near his boots, the glow of the flames painting his scarred face in restless light. He had the look of a soldier who had fought too long and found no peace in the silence that followed. Lines cut deep into his cheeks, not only from years of sun and war, but from loneliness that gnawed like hunger. He had seen enough killing to last several lifetimes. Yet he could not forget. In his mind, battle cries and gunpowder smoke returned whenever the night grew too still. The whiskey burned going down. He held in his mouth, swallowed, and listened to the wind push against the shutters. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the creek bed, their cries sharp as broken glass. He told himself he would finish the bottle and then sleep, and in sleep maybe he would see nothing at all. The sound came so soft at first, he thought it was the bottle talking back. A knock, hesitant, uneven, against the door. He turned his head slowly, as if movement might startle it away. No one came this far, not at this hour. Neighbors were 3 days' ride. Riders by night meant trouble. The knock came again. He reached for the rifle by the hearth and moved to the door. The wood was cold against his palm. For a moment he stood, listening. Wind, coyotes, silence. Then he pulled it open. A figure leaned against a frame, small, trembling. Her dark hair plastered her face with blood and dust. A girl. Her eyes widened at the sight of the rifle, yet she made no sound. She swayed, collapsed against him, and he caught her out of reflex more than mercy. She was light, frighteningly so, and warm blood seeped through his shirt where her shoulder pressed against him. He carried her inside, set her on the floor by the fire. For a moment he stood above her, rifle still in hand, his jaw tight. The firelight showed her for what she was. Comanche. Every scar on his body remembered what her people had done. The raids, the burning homesteads, the bodies on the ground. He could shut the door now, let the night reclaim her. But she stirred, her lips moving in a whisper he couldn't understand, and something in fragility of it anchored his hand. He lowered the rifle, though not far. He fetched water from the kettle and tore strips from a shirt long past use. Her wounds were ugly, slashes across her side, a gash at her arm where an arrow had grazed. He cleaned them as best he could, his hand steady though his breath was not. Eaches from her lips when the water stung carried a weight he couldn't ignore. When she opened her eyes again, the fire reflected in them, 2 dark mirrors of fear and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but the words broke apart, caught between her tongue and his understanding. He shook his head. Save your strength. She fell quiet. Her chest rose shallow and quick. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire popping between them. The man leaned back, staring at her with suspicion he couldn't shake. Why had she come to his door? Where was her family? The Comanche did not send children alone into the night. If she was here, something violent had happened, and where there was violence, vengeance always followed. Outside, the wind shifted. The coyotes had gone silent. He glanced to the window, where the prairie stretched pale under the moon, still and waiting. He thought of his own daughter, gone these many years, her face blurred by time yet sharp enough in his dreams to cut him awake. A raid had taken her, a raid not unlike the ones he had fought. He had buried her name deep, but now, watching this wounded girl, the ache of that grave pressed up through his ribs. He told himself this was madness, that she was not his to save, that bringing her inside was already a mistake. Yet he could not push her back into the dark. He stoked the fire higher, the shadows retreating from the corners of the cabin. Her eyes followed his every movement, wide but not afraid, only exhausted. He set a blanket across her and sat with his rifle across his knees. Sleep would not come. His ears strained for hoofbeats, for war cries. He saw again the figures that haunted him. Riders painted for battle, arrows lifted to the sky, torches set to dry wood. He had lived through enough to know that what comes by night rarely travels alone. The girl shifted, murmured something too soft to catch. Her hand twitched, reaching for nothing. The man looked at her, then to the fire, then to the window again. The prairie seemed to lean closer, as though listening. He whispered into the silence, voice low and gravel-thick. "They'll come." The words hung heavy in the cabin. He felt the truth of them in his bones. Somewhere beyond the horizon, riders were already gathering. He didn't know if they would come at dawn or at dusk, but they would come. For her, for blood, for him. He sat in the glow of the fire, the girl breathing shallow beside him, and let the night stretch thin around the cabin walls. The land was holding its breath, waiting for the first crack of thunder to split the silence. And he waited with it, a rifle in hand, knowing the storm was already on its way. Morning crept across the prairie like a thief, painting the land in shades of copper and pale gold. The man had not slept. He sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the horizon as though the world itself were deciding whether to spare him another day. The girl stirred on the floor near the hearth, shifting beneath the rough blanket. When her eyes opened, the first thing they found was him. She watched him silently, her face unreadable in the new light. He turned his gaze away. The room felt smaller now, as if the night had pushed in against the walls and left no space between them. He busied himself with the kettle, poured water into a cup, and set it near her. She reached for it slowly, wincing at the strain, and drank with both hands as though it might vanish if she hesitated. Her voice was raw when she spoke, a thin thread of English that barely carried. "Safe." The word hung between them, brittle and uncertain. He stared at her a long while before answering. "For now." She nodded, though she did not look convinced. Her eyes darted to the door, the windows, the rifle, as though she too understood that for now was no promise at all. He left her with the cup and stepped outside. The prairie stretched wide and empty, but he saw signs, branches broken along the creek bed, soil turned by fresh hooves. The land told stories if a man cared to read them, and the story it whispered was clear. Riders had passed through in the night, watching, waiting. His jaw tightened. He scanned the horizon, found nothing but heat rising off the ground, and went back inside. The girl was sitting up now, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes following him with sharp curiosity. "Name?" he asked, though his voice was flat, uncertain if he even wanted the answer. She hesitated, then whispered something soft in her own tongue, the syllables carrying more music than his rough ear could catch. He tried to repeat it, and she shook her head quickly, a flicker of a smile tugging at her mouth despite the bruises. He let it rest. Names had weight. He wasn't sure he was ready to carry hers. He set bread on the table, dried meat alongside it, and gestured for her to eat. She did so carefully, as if uncertain she had earned the right. He sat across from her, watching her movements, every bite reminding him of another child long gone. He had built this table with his own hands, once for a family that was no more. Now, years later, it held only two strangers bound by circumstance. When she finished, she tried to speak again, stringing broken English together with gestures. "Bad men chased. Took horse. No family." Her eyes lowered at the last words, and for the first time he saw not just fear, but something deeper, loneliness that matched his own. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Another tribe, perhaps, or white raiders. The details mattered little. What mattered was that she was alone, and alone children never stayed alive long on this land. He rubbed his face with both hands, the rough stubble scraping his palms. The right thing, the smart thing, would be to take her back toward the Comanche, leave her within sight of her people, and turn home before the war drums reached his ears. But he knew what waited on that path. Blood, suspicion, perhaps a knife in his back before he could explain himself. And yet, keeping her here meant something worse. They would come. He could already hear the hooves in his head, feel the circle of warriors tightening. When he lowered his hands, she was still staring at him, her eyes steady. "You! Help!" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Not a question this time, but a statement, fragile and certain. The man looked away, unable to meet it. He stepped outside again, letting the wind cool the heat rising in his chest. Clouds were gathering to the west, heavy and dark, thunder muttering beneath them. The air smelled of iron and rain. He worked the day with restless hands, mending a fence, chopping wood, anything to keep from thinking. Yet every swing of the axe, every thud of hammer against nail, felt like a drumbeat counting down to war. The land was too quiet, the birds absent, the creek sluggish as if the earth itself expected violence. By late afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. For a breath. The man thought the storm had broken early, but it was no Comanche war band. Only a weathered trader passing through, his wagon creaking beneath the weight of pelts. He slowed when he saw the cabin, tipped his hat, then spotted the girl through the window. His smile died on his lips. The trader spat in the dust. "You've got trouble, friend." The man said nothing. "Sheltering one of theirs?" The trader shook his head. "You'll bring a whole war party on yourself. Best turn her loose before nightfall. You know what's coming." The man's fingers tightened on the rifle in his hand, though he did not raise it. His silence was answer enough. The trader clicked his tongue, muttered a curse, and drove on, his wagon creaking away toward the horizon. When the dust settled, the man stood alone again, the words lingering like smoke. Best turn her loose. The thought knotted in his chest. He could still do it. But each time his eyes found the girl, pale and thin beneath the blanket, he saw another face overlay hers, the child he had lost. He knew then he would not send her away. Night fell heavy. The girl sat close to the fire, shadows dancing across her face. He found himself telling her a story, not in detail, not with names, but enough. A tale of a daughter who had once laughed in this very cabin, who had chased grasshoppers in the yard and sung off-key at dawn. His voice cracked on words he hadn't spoken in years. The girl listened, her head tilted, not understanding every word but catching enough. Her eyes softened, and for the first time she reached out, laying a small hand against his arm. He stilled, the gesture cutting deeper than any blade. Thunder rolled outside, rattling the windows. He pulled the shutters tight and checked his rifle again. The storm was coming, whether of rain or blood. He could not yet tell. He lay on the floorboards at night, the rifle within reach, the girl asleep near the hearth. Dreams came restless, filled with fire and hoofbeats. When he woke near dawn, his heart pounding, he swore he could hear drums on the horizon. He rose, stepped to the door, and pushed it open. The prairie stretched wide under the early light, empty as ever. But the silence was wrong, too still, too measured. The man gripped the rifle tighter, staring at the horizon. He knew the waiting was almost over. Dawn broke without warmth. The sun rose pale, veiled behind thin clouds, as though reluctant to shine upon what lay waiting. The man stepped outside, the door's hinges groaning, rifle balance in his grip. He had felt them before he saw them, the silence of the land, the hell breath of the prairie. Across the ridge, 70 riders sat on painted ponies. Their silhouettes were sharp against the sky, motionless, each man adorned in feathers, bone, and paint that marked him for war. The sight rooted him in place. He had expected them, dreamed of them, and yet the reality pressed a breath from his lungs. At the center, one rider held himself with a gravity that needed no words. His hair was streaked with gray, his face darkened with black paint. His lance was feathered in red. The man knew without being told. This was the girl's father. They did not charge. They did not cry out. They only watched, 70 pairs of eyes fixed upon the cabin and the man standing before it. The weight of their silence was more terrifying than any war whoop. He felt like prey pinned in the open. Behind him, the girl appeared in the doorway, her small figure wrapped in the blanket. She froze at the sight, her lips parting but no sound emerging. Her gaze sought the figure at the center, and something in her body shifted. Fear, recognition, longing. The father lifted his lance and lowered it toward the cabin. His voice carried, rough but clear. "My blood is inside. You will bring her out." The man's throat tightened. He gripped the rifle harder, though he knew 70 rifles could return his defiance with certainty. He turned slightly, looking back at the girl. Her eyes were wide, torn between the man who had saved her and the father who claimed her. She took a step forward, then stopped, trembling. The silence stretched thin, the air heavy with unspoken choices. At last, the man shook his head once. Not yet. He stepped back inside and shut the door. The war party did not ride away. That day dragged like a blade through the cracks in the shutters. He saw their shapes shifting, circling, always there. They lit no fires, raised no smoke, but their presence filled the prairie like thunderheads waiting to break. Inside, the girl watched him with questions she did not speak. He kept himself busy, sharpening knives, checking powder, sealing gaps in the shutters with strips of cloth. Each act was mechanical, a rhythm to keep fear at bay. But he felt her eyes on him, and in them he read both hope and sorrow. As the sun sank low, a rider approached alone. He bore a white cloth tied to his spear, a symbol that offered talk before blood. The man stepped outside, rifle across his arm but muzzle lowered. The war chief's voice came again, harsher now, as the translator rode beside him. You have my daughter. You will return her. She is not yours. The man's jaw worked as he searched for words. His voice came rough, cracked from disuse. She was dying when she came to me. I gave her shelter. Nothing more. The chief's dark eyes glinted. Shelter is claim. You have taken what is mine. The girl slipped to the doorway again, clutching the frame, calling out in Comanche words a man could not understand. The father's sternness faltered for a heartbeat. His eyes softened as they met hers. The man felt the bond between them like a cord stretched taut, one he had no right to sever. He should have handed her over then, ended it before fire swallowed his home. Yet when the girl looked back at him, the same wordless plea returned. Do not give me away. He could not. The father's hand lifted. A war lance was thrust into the earth before the cabin, its feathers rattling in the breeze. A warning, a promise. The warriors pulled back, leaving it there like a tombstone waiting for a name. Night fell heavy. From beyond the ridge, drums began, a slow, steady thrum that carried through the soil, through the wood of the cabin, through bone. The girl sat close to the fire, her face pale, while the man sat with his rifle and stared at the lance planted outside. The sound was not meant for ears alone. It was meant for the spirit, to break the will before the body. Hours stretched. The drum ceased. Silence pressed in, broken only by the creak of timber and the girl's soft breathing. He looked at her, and for the first time he spoke the truth aloud. If I send you back, I die inside. If I keep you, I die out here. Either way, I reckon death's already chosen me. Her eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. She reached for the rifle resting on his knees. Her fingers brushed the stock, tentative but determined. He understood then. She did not wish to be a burden. She wished to fight beside him. If fighting was all that remained, he placed his hand over hers, steadying it. Not yet. The night dragged into morning. He drifted in and out of shallow sleep, dreams full of hoofbeats and flame. When he rose, the prairie outside was the same, riders scattered on the horizon, always watching, always waiting. The land still stood in the earth, feathers lifting in the dawn breeze. The girl knelt by the fire, silent but alert. She had grown hard in these few days. Her fear tempered into something sharper, a quiet resolve that mirrored his own. He stepped to the door once more, scanning the horizon. The war party had not moved. Their patience was infinite. They could starve him out as easily as burn him alive. He knew this. Yet, when he looked back at the girl, he also knew he would not surrender her. The line had been drawn, though neither side had spoken it. By dusk, the father rode forward again, stopping within earshot of the cabin. His voice carried like thunder rolling low. Tomorrow, the ground will drink blood. Choose how it drinks, yours or mine. The man stood at the doorway, rifle in hand. The girl behind him. He gave no answer. Silence was answer enough. The father turned, lifted his hand, and the warriors wheeled their horses in unison, circling once before retreating to the ridge. The drums began again, faster this time, pulsing like a heartbeat against the earth. The man shut the door, leaned against it, and closed his eyes. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, the weight of choice pressing from all sides. The girl touched his arm, her face steady now, no longer pleading but prepared. He nodded once, more to himself than to her. Tomorrow, he whispered. The word tasted like iron. The night before the storm broke was the longest he had ever lived. The cabin groaned with every gust. The shutters rattled like teeth, and the war drums outside beat steady as a heart unwilling to die. He sat by the window, rifle cradled, eyes fixed on the lance planted in the soil. Each feather shivered with the wind, like breath from the earth itself. The girl slept only in fragments, jerking awake at the sound of horses calling to one another in the distance. Once, she rose and sat near him, her blanket falling to her shoulders, her face pale but calm. She said nothing, and neither did he. Words could not ease what morning promised. At first light, the drum stopped. Silence swept the prairie, heavier than thunder. He knew it then. This was the hour. He checked the powder horn, the cartridges, the knife at his belt. Each motion felt final, like setting stones on his own grave. When the sun climbed above the ridge, the riders came, 70 strong, fanning across the plain in a half-circle, their ponies snorting steam into the cold air. The father rode at their head, black paint stark against his weathered face. His voice cut the morning. "Give her to me." The man stepped onto the porch, rifle in his grip, shoulders squared. Behind him, the girl stood in the doorway, her eyes locked on her father. Neither side moved. For a moment, it seemed the standoff itself might stretch forever, frozen beneath the sky. Then the father lifted his hand. The charge came like a storm unleashed. Hooves thundered, arrows whistled, rifles cracked. The man ducked back into the cabin as splinters exploded from the doorframe. The girl screamed and pressed against the wall. He fired to the window, the recoil slamming his shoulder, the smoke choking his lungs. A rider pitched from his horse, and another veered away. But still they came, their war cries splitting the air. The cabin shook beneath the assault. Arrows bit into the roof. Flames licked at the shutters. Bullets punched through the walls. He reloaded with frantic hands, firing, reloading, firing, until the rifle barrel burned against his palm. The girl moved as he shouted, fetching water, dousing sparks before they could take the wood. She was no longer the helpless child who had arrived at his door. Her face was set with iron resolve, her body quick and steady. The first wave broke, riders pulling back to regroup. Smoke curled from the roof. He leaned against the wall, chest heaving, sweat running into his eyes. The girl pressed water to his lips, her small hand trembling as it touched his. He drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked out again. They had not gone. They circled wide, regrouping for the final strike. He could see the father at their center, watching with eyes like flint. The man understood. This was not only a battle for a daughter. This was a trial of two fathers, two worlds colliding. The second charge came with greater fury. The cabin quaked as riders swept close, firing from the saddle. A bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him against the table. He bit down hard, teeth gritted, forced himself upright. His vision blurred, but he held steady enough to fire again. The girl rushed him, panic flashing across her face, but he pushed her back toward cover. They broke through the door. Two warriors surged inside, blades flashing. He dropped one with a shot, then grappled with the other, their bodies slamming against the wall. The knife came close, too close, before the girl swung a length of wood from the fire, striking the warrior's head with all her strength. He crumpled, blood steaming against the floorboards. Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by their ragged breaths. The girl stared at what she had done, her hands trembling. He seized her shoulders, forced her eyes to his. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Outside, the war cries rose again. The father had come forward, dismounting, walking toward the cabin with slow, deliberate steps. The warriors held back, the circle tightening but not closing. The man stepped out, bleeding, rifle clutched though his strength waned. The girl followed, her small frame at his side. The father stopped a dozen paces away. His eyes moved from his daughter to the man, lingering on the blood, the rifle, the smoke rising from the broken cabin. He raised his hand, signaling the warriors to stillness. The prairie was silent. The girl stepped forward. Her voice broke, spilling Comanche words rapid and raw. Her eyes fixed on her father. Her hands trembled, but her tone carried steel. The man could not understand the words, but he understood their weight. She was choosing both of them. The father's gaze faltered, his jaw tightened, his eyes shifting between his daughter and the man who stood bleeding yet unbroken beside her. The silence stretched long, the entire world balanced on the edge of his decision. Finally, he lowered his lance. The warrior shifted uneasily, but obeyed. The father turned his face to the girl, and for the first time, the stern mask cracked. He spoke low, a word the man could not hear, and the girl's shoulders shook with relief. She stepped back to the man's side, her hand brushing his, small but steady. The father mounted his horse again. He looked once more at the man, long, hard, a look not of gratitude but of recognition. Then he wheeled his horse, lifted his hand, and the war party rode with him, their hooves drumming the prairie until the sound dwindled into distance. The man stood swaying, the rifle slipping from his grasp. The girl caught his arm, steadying him with surprising strength. Together they turned back to the cabin, the smoke still rising, the damage plain. It would take weeks to mend what the fight had torn apart. But inside, something deeper had shifted. He lowered himself to the floor, blood seeping through his shirt, exhaustion pulling him down. The girl knelt beside him, pressing cloth to the wound, her face fierce with determination. He watched her in the flickering light, and for the first time in years, the weight on his chest eased. He had not saved her to redeem himself, but in saving her, he had found what the war had stolen from him: purpose, kinship, the fragile spark of family. Outside, the wind swept across the open land, carrying the fading echo of hooves. The prairie was wide, ruthless, and endless, but for the first time in a long while, he did not feel alone within it. The fire cracked, the girl's hand steadied his wound, and he let his eyes close. Somewhere beyond pain, beyond loss, lay a future he had not dared imagine, a future carved not from blood, but from choice.